Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from McKenna McLaughlin, who says, I've been trying to look at things in a different light lately, going so far as to reach out to non-feminists and theists and atheists to see if we can stop focusing on our labels and instead focus on the issues at hand. While sitting back and watching various sides going back and forth, I've noticed that issues that both sides talk about seem to get brushed to the side in favor of finger pointing and blaming people for the issue not being solved. Do you feel that if we could all look past our labels and our groups, like feminist, MRA, men's lib, women's lib, atheist, theist, etc., that we would have a good chance of solving a lot of problems that we tend to push off on the other side? Or is it that some sides just can't get along no matter what to be able to focus on issues over finger pointing? I'm with you in principle, and it sounds really good to say we should focus less on whose side who is on and more on the issues. Like, obviously, that's what we would want to do. But there are some issues where it's going to be very difficult to reach out to the other side, so to speak, and get anything productive done just because the two sides are so far apart on the basic facts of the issue. Like, you take feminists and anti-feminists, and I'm using anti-feminists just to sort of throw the widest possible net. You know, MRAs, quote-unquote egalitarians, all the people who think that feminism is a bad thing or an unnecessary thing or whatever. Those two sides are so far apart on fundamental facts of certain issues, like the wage gap, which most people, most educated people, most informed people consider to be a fact. The wage gap exists. It's there in Department of Labor statistics, for Christ's sake. There's not a lot to argue about in terms of whether or not the gap exists. But the argument between feminists and anti-feminists over the wage gap isn't over, well, what should we do about it? What's the best way to fix it? The argument is over whether or not it exists. The same thing could be said about arguments between atheists and theists. If you're talking about something like creationism versus evolution, the argument isn't over something productive, like, what would be the best way to teach evolutionary theory to high school students so that they would have a better understanding of it. The argument is over whether or not we should even teach it at all, because the other side doesn't believe that it even happened, that it's even a scientific fact. And they have a counterproposal that is utterly preposterous and not supported by any science at all. So it's really difficult to find a middle ground there and to find some place where you can both sort of agree on a common goal and you can both pull in the same direction. It's not so much about labels, not always. Sometimes you can try to focus on issues and still find yourself going nowhere because the other side, the side that is opposing you, has got it so completely wrong and has its head so far up its own ass that you just can't get anywhere with them. Carlisle the Cinephile. Hello, Steve. A few weeks ago, I was discussing the X-Men films with a friend, and he said that he can't justify spending money on the films because of ethically questionable things that Bryan Singer has done. Do you think it's ethical to enjoy the work of an artist while condemning their actions in their personal lives? I think that's a decision everybody has to make for themselves. I know I have compartmentalized with quite a few artists, quite a few filmmakers. Woody Allen has quite a few very troubling accusations on his resume that I try to sort of look away from when I'm watching, say, Annie Hall, which is one of my favorite films. I just made a video a couple weeks ago, an Off Monday Ramble video, in the wake of the death of David Bowie. There are some people who are extremely bothered by some of the things in Bowie's past that they feel distracts from their ability to enjoy his music. And other people feel like that's something that they're willing to put up with, or they don't think it's that big of a deal and they would rather enjoy the music. So it's something that you have to decide for yourself. If you do decide that a particular filmmaker's wrongdoing is not enough for you to stop seeing their movies or to disregard their work, then that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a decision that you have to make. If you are troubled by the sins, I suppose, or possible sins of a given filmmaker. If we're talking about a director, like say Bryan Singer, as you mentioned, if you find yourself being sort of torn about that, consider that even though a director is the author of a film, filmmaking is an incredibly collaborative process. And just because you are going to see a film made by a particular director who you might consider problematic for one reason or another, that doesn't mean that you are showing support for only that director. You're also showing support for the cast, for the crew, for the writer, for the producer, for the studio. So you can sort of maybe talk yourself into it that way and say, well, okay, I'm going to see the next X-Men movie. I'm a little creeped out by some of the whispers about Bryan Singer's personal life, some of the things he may have done. I'm not so crazy about that, but I'm a big fan of Michael Fassbender. I think he's a fantastic Magneto. You know, I'm a big fan of Jennifer Lawrence. I think she's a great Mystique, so I'm going to go and see the movie for that reason. And I'll just sort of overlook the Bryan Singer factor. There are things you could consider as far as that goes. Bruce Bartup. So I'm a feminist, and a woman really pisses me off. And I say something well-meant but flat-out sexist, like I'm willing to listen even though she's over-emotional. I mean a classic 101 flat-footed faux pas with added shame sprinkles. Illustrate with your own anecdote. And she flattens you. Pow! You are a disgusting sexist. Blam! She always knew male feminists were creep. Zap! How many times? Check your frickin' privilege. Kerblowy! The movement would be so much better off without you. You let her down, you let the side down, and most of all, you don't actually give a damn. You wanted to watch sports. You frickin' hate Downton Abbey, and it was a rerun, or whatever. 1. Women should not have to worry about how allies feel. 2. Guilt and shame are healthy in small doses. 3. Good intentions don't cut it. Sorry won't either. 4. Male feminists do 1/10 the work, get all the privileges, and we think we deserve it. 5. Sucking it up and not crying is not an option. Crying, or any tendency thereto, is equally absurd. 6. There are no men's groups with which to share your little pint-sized petulance. What is my next move? Rely on relationships? Listen and believe? Emigrate? Are you sure sucking it up and crying isn't an option? I think everybody who has attempted to be a good ally in terms of social justice, whether we're talking about feminism or racial justice or, rights for the disabled or rights for LGBT folks or whatever, if you are trying to be an ally and a supporter of folks who are in a marginalized group, who are pushing for equality and justice for people in their group, you will invariably run up against an experience kind of like the one that you're describing. Maybe not as extreme, but you'll find yourself saying something that you shouldn't have said, doing something you shouldn't have done, making an ass out of yourself, being insensitive, being clueless and obtuse, and the only thing you can do is to listen to what people are telling you about why what you did was wrong and accept responsibility and try not to do that anymore. Try to be better from that point on. And if your feelings are hurt, or you feel upset, or you feel disappointed in yourself, or you feel wounded that, your friends who you're trying to be allies for weren't more understanding or whatever, maybe the best thing to do is to just sort of keep that to yourself, to suck that up. Or to talk to a friend. Maybe you don't have to go to a group. You don't have to have like a men's group that you can go to, although maybe that would help for some folks. But maybe just find a friend who can listen to you. So you can sort of vent. You can say, oh man, I really screwed up. They're really mad at me. I didn't realize I was saying something wrong, but I was, and it really hurt their feelings, or it really got them pissed off at me. And I'm really sorry, but I don't know what to do. I feel like such an asshole. Someplace to just sort of get that out would help. But that's unavoidable. If you are a privileged person and you're trying to listen and understand and support and be an ally, invariably you're going to fuck up. I've done it. People I know have done it. Wonderful people, really stand-up, awesome people that I know. have done or said things that they should not have done or said, completely innocently, unintentionally, and they've been brought up short on it, and rightfully so, because that's the only way you're ever going to learn. That's the only way you're ever going to get any better. So the best thing to do is to sort of take these experiences as lessons and to try and use them to make yourself better, to use it as a learning experience. Skullbearer, what do you think of the latest Dawkins debacle? As a feminist and an atheist, it's horrifying to see him fall down the MRA rabbit hole. A much briefer answer to Bruce's question from a moment ago would be to just do the opposite of what Richard Dawkins always does. Because it seems like Richard Dawkins always ends up getting himself in trouble for tweeting something awful or for sharing something awful that some horrible person has put on Twitter or YouTube or whatever, and people bring to Dawkins' attention how awful this thing is and why he should not be sharing it. And he just never seems to learn the lesson. Dawkins shared this video that sort of argued in an attempt to be funny, an attempt to be satirical, argued that feminists and Islamists are natural allies, and that, you know, feminists don't mind rape as long as it's a Muslim doing it. These really disgusting accusations against feminists, and Dawkins apparently just thought this was hilarious. And not only is that a horrible thing to think, and not only does that display it suggests some very disturbing things, not only about Dawkins' understanding of feminism, but his sense of humor, if he thinks something like that is funny, or he finds that insightful and on the mark. It says all kinds of really disturbing things about Richard Dawkins, and really disappointing things about Richard Dawkins. And it seems like the more he does this, and the more he makes the same excuse, well, how was I supposed to know the guy was an asshole? How was I supposed to know that the person featured in the video was based on a real person who has received harassment in the past? How was I supposed to know? That excuse gets thinner and thinner and thinner every time he uses it, and it was pretty fucking thin the first time. So yeah, I mean, look, I no longer pay attention to Dawkins on Twitter. I don't see any value to following him on Twitter at all. I think it's a fucking horror show. I think it's a shit show. I think it's an embarrassment to the man. I think it's beneath him. I think it does nothing but detract from his accomplishments as a scientist and a writer and a science communicator. The more he does this shit, the more he shares, he retweets videos applauding the exploits or the work of the worst fucking people on the internet, and the more he promotes misogyny and sexism and bigotry while claiming to be a feminist and a supporter of equality and a supporter of social justice, the more he does that, the harder and harder it becomes for me to keep this image in my mind of the guy who gave the Christmas lectures at the Royal Institution in 1991. Because that's always the image I go back to. Whenever Dawkins does something fucking horrible, I always go back to that image of, oh, but he gave the Royal Institution lectures in 1991, Waking Up in the Universe, such a wonderful series. And it is, it's a wonderful series. It's magical. It's some of the best science instruction that I've ever seen. I mean, it's like the biology equivalent of Carl Sagan's Cosmos. It's wonderful. But the more he fucking puts this garbage on his Twitter account, the harder and harder it is. The further away that Dawkins looks from the Dawkins of old, the Dawkins that I admire, the Dawkins that I am grateful to still. So yeah, it's really disappointing. It's really disappointing. I don't know what else to say about it. Becca Hawkins. Hey Steve, I'm a Christian woman who grew up in an evangelical home, and I remember my embarrassing younger days when I was into apologetics books and even tried to give them to an atheist friend of mine in high school, and he easily refuted all their arguments and exposed a lot of their assumptions. Thankfully, he and I are still friends to this day. Then, when I entered college and realized that there is actually a difference between apologetics and scholarship, though an apologist might make use of some scholarship, I entered a phase in which I began to be angry about the poor quality of a lot of Christian apologetics. And then I entered a phase in which I was more or less entertained by how shoddy a lot of them are/were. I also dislike the condescension I see a lot of the time from many Christian apologists toward atheists and skeptics in general, and I've even experienced it myself when I've challenged an apologetic argument or two from certain apologists, such as the "no one would die for a lie" argument, etc. My question for you is, how do you deal with condescending apologists when you've had direct conversations with them? I think of your interaction with Cy ten Bruggencate, for example. I liked how you handled that, but I was curious about other interactions with apologists you've had, ones I haven't seen. Thanks. Becca. Well, the main thing is to just sort of keep your cool. Don't get upset. Don't get angry at them if they are making really bad arguments, or if you sense that they are trying to manipulate you, or they're down-talking you, or they're assuming that you don't know something. Because apologists do that a lot, especially when they're talking to their fellow Christians. They're sort of banking on the person they're talking to not knowing enough about the subject to be able to detect the flaw in their argument. That's the only way a lot of those arguments work. So if you detect an apologist doing that, just don't get upset with them. Don't get angry with them. Don't lose your cool. I mean, all I really did with Cy was just be patient with him, was just listen to what he said and try to answer his questions honestly and directly and completely, and to ask some questions of my own, and just to not let him maneuver me as he wanted to. Because with Cy and with a presuppositional apologist, it's all about maneuvering. They're constantly trying to push you to the spot where they need you to be so they can make their next argument. Because with presuppositional apologetics, especially the way that Cy ten Bruggencate employs it, it's completely a con. It's a hustle, and they have to get you in the right spot so they can get to the next step, so they can make the next move in the con. And if you just are cool about it, and you know what's going on, and you just sort of, refuse to allow them to move you where they want you to move. I mean, you might not accomplish anything. You're certainly not going to persuade them of anything, but you can at least stalemate them. You can at least keep them from making their case or making their point, and maybe even have some fun. And that's really all. If you're entering an argument or an exchange with an apologist with any illusions that you're going to accomplish anything other than maybe have an interesting and hopefully fun conversation, you're deluding yourself, because it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to accomplish anything. But hopefully you'll be able to hold up your end. It'll be good exercise for you, and it'll be a fun experience, and not too frustrating of an experience. I hope so far this video has not been a very frustrating experience for you. I'm going to try to make it even less frustrating than it has been up to this point, because from now until the end, it's going to go pretty quick, because it's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Ahoy Yerno! This may be heresy, but Breaking Bad is a poorly written show with uninspired cardboard characters saved by great actors. Walter and Skyler are both boring characters, but at least Walter was acted by someone with charisma. I loved the show, but the writing was shallow as a puddle of rainwater on a sunny day. Did you like Breaking Bad? Well, I'm going to commit an even worse heresy than yours and say that I have not yet watched it. I've not seen a single episode of Breaking Bad. I would like to, I'm a big X-Files fan, and that's where Vince Gilligan cut his teeth as a writer and a producer on the X-Files, so I would like to check it out, but I just haven't. Knight 6831, are you going to do a 5 stupid things about Captain Janeway, Captain Sisko, and Captain Archer? Oh, yeah, I'm sure I will at some point. I mean, I'm enough of a Star Trek nerd that I'm always looking for excuses to sort of go back to that well. I love making Star Trek videos, and I think the Star Trek 5 stupid things videos I've done in the past have all been pretty good and pretty fun. So yeah, I'm sure I'll get around to doing Sisko and Janeway and Archer at some point. I don't know when, but at some point. Kevin Logan, hello. Is it me you're looking for? It's not, really. It's not. But, hello from the other side. I've tried to call 1,000 times to tell you I'm sorry for everything that I've done. I mean, I know it's a completely different song, but whenever I hear the first line of that Adele song, I always think of the Lionel Richie song, because it sounds very similar when they start. Tressig character. Can you be a skeptic and a feminist? Yes, absolutely. You can be a skeptic and a feminist. Lots of feminists are also skeptics. You're watching a video made by one right now. Life Until Love. Hey Steve, when is the latest you read questions? Does it make a difference when someone posts? It doesn't make a difference in terms of whether or not it makes it into the video when you post the question, as long as I see the question before I compile the script for the video. And I usually go through the comments on the previous video and collect the questions for the next video on Wednesday, early Wednesday evening my time, Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Time for me. So maybe around 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, something like that, p.m. Is when I compile the questions for the next You Had to Ask video. So if you don't have your question in by Wednesday late afternoon, early evening my time, then it's probably too late. Yarrow Kassir, you ever think you'll want to answer an entire You Had to Ask with as sarcastic a tone as you can manage? I'm 100% sarcastic all the time for every question I've ever answered. Did you not pick up on that? Weird. Joanna Roberts, so did you build any Calvin and Hobbes type snowmen? No, I actually did not have any fun with this most recent snowfall. I just sort of glared at it resentfully through the window and waited for it to melt. And thankfully, because right after the snowfall was over and it sort of settled in for a couple of days, we went right back to having this insanely warm winter where it's been like, 50 and 60 degrees the last couple of days. So the snow has actually melted mostly away already. So no, I did not build any snowmen. I was glaring at it from the window. Jacob Zentichko, in light of your 5 stupid things about primary elections, what are your thoughts on open primaries? See, that's a tough one for me because on the one hand, I think an open primary is good because, a primary election is something that affects everybody, whether you're a member of the party or not, and maybe it's fair that they should be open to everybody to vote in because everybody's affected by the outcome. But then on the other hand, I think, yeah, but isn't it kind of an internal party matter? I mean, if the Republican Party in a given state holds a primary to nominate or to choose delegates for to eventually decide the nominee for its party, should non-Republicans really get to choose? Should non-Republicans really have the opportunity to vote in that election? So it's tough for me, you know what I mean? It's tough for me because I see both sides of it. I think there are good reasons for open primaries, but I think there are also solid reasons, understandable reasons for why parties would want to have a closed primary. So it's tough. David Edwards, can an atheist be non-political? They seem to go hand in hand. It's almost as if the only way for a movement to gain ground is through the political process. Well, yeah, that's exactly right. You can be an atheist and be non-political or be of any political persuasion, because atheism doesn't necessitate that you adopt any particular political ideology. But I do think the atheist movement has to be political. It doesn't have to align itself with any particular political party, but the movement itself is a social movement. And as such, I think it has to be political, at least in part. There has to be a political aspect to it. So if you want to be a movement atheist, if you want to be an atheist activist, I think you do have to be political. You don't have to be any particular type of political, but you do have to be political if you're going to be a social activist. That's just kind of the way it works. Crowbro. Hi, Steve. Are there any YouTubers that have debunked or responded to Thunderfoot's anti-feminist videos? Thanks. Christy Winters. I will recommend Christy Winters until I can't recommend people anymore. Christy Winters is just generally awesome. Her YouTube channel is something that you should be checking out anyway. But she has, in the last couple months, done a series of videos on evidence for patriarchy and evidence for other feminist arguments, feminist concepts that have just been excellent. And they are a really, really great starting point for rebuttals to common anti-feminist arguments. So Christy Winters, check her out. That's a great place to start. Teensy Tiny Ninja. Steve, what's your favorite color? Bet no one has ever asked you that. I think somebody did at some point, but I can't really remember. My favorite color, green, I guess. Probably green. My favorite color. You wouldn't be able to tell by how I dress. You'd probably think it was like black or blue. But yeah, my favorite color is green. And I even have a sentimental reason for it, because when I was a little kid, my dad drove a pickup truck that was green. And green was my favorite color because of that. Isn't that sweet? Aren't you glad you asked? Hey, that's it for the questions, everybody. It's time to give somebody a shout out, and the shout out this week goes to the YouTube channel run by the one, the only, Godless Geezer. Godless Geezer is someone who I mentioned in this week's Off Monday Ramble video a few days ago, because he recently posted a video and started a crowdfunding page for his daughter, who came out as trans, and he's raising money to help his daughter pay for her therapy, for her transition therapy, because his daughter is transitioning. And that's a wonderful thing, and I'll link to that in the description of this video as well if you didn't see it before, so you can go and help out Godless Geezer and his daughter Laura with the transition fund. That would be a wonderful thing to do. And Godless Geezer's YouTube channel, just in general, is something that you should check out and see if it's your cup of tea, because some of his stuff is really good on there. He just put up a video a couple days ago that was a sort of a sequel to a video he put up a little while ago where he tearfully endorsed Donald Trump. He sort of came to the tragic conclusion that Donald Trump might be the Republican candidate with the best chance of winning the nomination, and he in a very heartbroken, overwrought mood endorsed Donald Trump. And then just a couple of days ago, he made a video where he changed his mind and he endorsed a far better Republican candidate, I think. Certainly a Republican candidate that I would consider voting for if this person were actually able to run. But that's a really good video. A lot of his stuff is really excellent. So check out, if you've never heard of him or you've never watched his channel, check out Godless Geezer. And particularly check out the videos about his daughter's ongoing transition. And if you can possibly help out with that, please consider helping out with that. Well, I also want to remind you, as always, to check out the Lemme Listen podcasts. These are a series of podcasts created and hosted by the brilliant Jason Harding, one of my bestest buddies in the whole world. He has 3 podcasts that he creates. There's Lemme Finish, which he co-hosts with Finite Atticus, which is just hilarious. There's Late Seating, which is an improv comedy podcast that he has completed. He completed the first season of it last year. You can listen to that whole thing if you want. And the second season is coming up very soon now. In the next couple weeks or couple months, I think he's gearing up to start the second season of American Monsters, and that's going to be awesome because the first season was terrific. You should check that out. And also, there is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that Jason hosts with me, where we take classic films or films that have a reputation of being just awful. We give them a fresh watch, a fresh review. We make fun of them as we summarize the plot, and then we say whether or not we think they deserve to be thought of as classics or as, all-time bombs. And it's a really, really fun show to do. It's one of my favorite things that I do, and it's a fun show to listen to, and I wish that you would listen to it. And listen to all of the Lemme Finish, or the Lemme Listen podcasts, I should say. You should go to LemmeListenPodcasts.com and listen to all of them. I highly recommend the Lemme Listen podcast. I really, really encourage you to go listen to those. Well, that is it for me, everybody. I am done. I am out of here for another week. Thank you, as always, for listening. I want to remind you to please leave a comment on this video to ask me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. I have no choice about that if I want to keep doing this series, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. It's sort of right there in the title. So please do ask your question for next time. Well, that's it. I'm out of here. I'll see you next time, everybody. Take care. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and share it and subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.